I'm Sarah, and I thought I knew what family loyalty meant until my Aunt Patricia cornered me at last Sunday's dinner with her signature condescending whisper. What happened next exposed a web of lies that had been carefully constructed around me for years, and changed everything I believed about the people I'd been sacrificing for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of that fateful Sunday dinner started like any other weekend in my cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland. At 28, I was still sleeping on a pull-out couch because my actual bedroom had been converted into a makeshift office where I worked my second job as a freelance graphic designer. The irony wasn't lost on me that I created beautiful spaces for other people's businesses while living in what could generously be called organized chaos. My phone buzzed at 7:30 a.m. with a text from Mom reminding me about dinner at Grandma Rose's house, as if I'd ever missed a single Sunday gathering in the past decade. These weekly dinners weren't optional in the Morrison family. They were sacred obligations that everyone attended unless they were literally hospitalized. And even then, Grandma Rose had been known to make exceptions for video calls from hospital beds. I dragged myself out of bed, stepping over the pile of client portfolios scattered across my hardwood floor, and made my way to the kitchen that was more of an alcove than an actual room. The coffee maker, a secondhand find from a garage sale 3 years ago, wheezed to life as I contemplated what excuse I could possibly manufacture to skip dinner this week. Not because I didn't love my family, but because these gatherings had become increasingly suffocating as my financial situation grew more precarious and everyone else seemed to be thriving. The studio apartment cost me $1,800 a month, which was considered a steal in Portland's inflated housing market, but represented nearly 60% of my take-home pay from my day job at Meridian Marketing Solutions. I worked as a junior account coordinator, a fancy title for someone who spent 40 hours a week managing social media campaigns for local restaurants and small businesses while dreaming of something more meaningful. My freelance work brought in an additional $800 to $1,200 monthly, depending on how many projects I could squeeze into evenings and weekends. Every dollar was already allocated before it hit my checking account. Rent, utilities, groceries, student loan payments, car insurance, health insurance, and the endless stream of family financial emergencies that somehow always became my responsibility to solve. The shower in my bathroom barely produced lukewarm water, another charming feature of my affordable housing situation. As I stood under the weak stream, I mentally calculated how much money I had left after this week's expenses. $43 until my next paycheck on Friday. Enough for gas, and maybe one grocery run if I stuck to generic brands and avoided anything remotely resembling luxury, like the fancy Greek yogurt I'd been craving for weeks. This financial tightrope walk had become my normal routine over the past 3 years, ever since I'd moved out of my childhood home in Southeast Portland and tried to establish some semblance of independence. What I hadn't anticipated was how leaving home would somehow make me more financially responsible for my extended family, not less. The request started small and innocent enough. Could I help Cousin Emma with her car repair? Would I mind contributing to Uncle Dave's medical bills? Could I pitch in for Grandma Rose's prescription costs that Medicare didn't cover? Each request came with detailed explanations of why I was the logical choice to help. I had a steady job, unlike Cousin Emma, who worked part-time at a coffee shop. I didn't have children to support, unlike most of my cousins who were busy raising families. I was responsible with money, unlike my brother Marcus, who had a reputation for spending his paychecks on video games and expensive sneakers. The logic seemed sound, and my desire to be useful to the people I loved made saying no feel impossible. What started as occasional $50 or $100 contributions had gradually escalated into a monthly expectation that I would cover various family shortfalls. My contribution to the family financial pool had grown so gradually that I didn't notice the pattern until I was drowning in it. Last month alone, I'd given $300 to help with Grandma Rose's property taxes, $200 for cousin Emma's dental work, and another $150 for my younger sister Ashley's textbooks. The irony was that everyone seemed to assume I was doing well financially because I lived alone in the city and had what they considered a professional job. The reality was that I was barely surviving, eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights, and wearing the same 3 professional outfits to work in rotation because I couldn't afford to expand my wardrobe. I'd become skilled at finding free entertainment, haunting library events and free museum days, walking instead of taking public transportation whenever possible to save the fare. My family saw what they wanted to see: a successful young woman with her own apartment and a marketing job, someone who had made it out of the modest neighborhood where most of them still lived. They didn't see the credit card debt I'd accumulated trying to keep up with their requests, or the way I carefully calculated every purchase down to the dollar. They didn't know that I hadn't bought new clothes in 8 months, or that I'd been putting off a dental cleaning because the copay wasn't in my budget. The drive to Grandma Rose's house in my 10-year-old Honda Civic gave me 30 minutes to mentally prepare for the weekly performance of pretending everything was fine. The car's air conditioning had died 2 summers ago, and I couldn't afford the repair. So I drove with the windows down and arrived at family gatherings looking slightly windblown, but hoping no one would ask why I didn't just use the AC like a normal person. Grandma Rose lived in the same modest ranch house where she'd raised 4 children, including my mother and Aunt Patricia. The neighborhood had seen better days, but Rose had maintained her property with the same stubborn pride that characterized everything else about her. The front yard was meticulously landscaped with flowers that bloomed in careful succession throughout the growing season, and the house itself was painted a cheerful yellow that Rose refreshed every few years, whether it needed it or not. Sunday dinners at Grandma Rose's followed a predictable pattern that had been established decades before I was born. The extended family would gather around 2 o'clock, with various aunts and uncles contributing side dishes while Rose prepared the main course. Conversation flowed around sports, work, neighborhood gossip, and family updates while multiple generations of Morrisons filled their plates and caught up on each other's lives. I pulled into the driveway behind Uncle Dave's pickup truck and took a deep breath before getting out of my car. Through the living room window, I could see the familiar chaos of a Morrison family gathering. Children running between adults, multiple conversations happening simultaneously, and the general warm mayhem that had defined my childhood Sundays. Despite my financial anxieties, I genuinely loved these people and looked forward to the few hours each week when I felt connected to something larger than my solitary apartment life. The front door opened before I could knock, and my 8-year-old nephew Tyler launched himself into my arms with the kind of enthusiasm that only children can muster. Aunt Sarah. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mom said you might bring your laptop so I could show you my Minecraft world. Tyler was my sister Ashley's oldest son, a bright kid who had inherited the Morrison family's tendency toward creative projects and big dreams. Let me get through. The door first, buddy, I laughed, ruffling his sandy brown hair as he led me into the living room where the rest of the family was already assembled. The familiar smells of Rose's cooking filled the house. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green, beans with almonds, and the dinner rolls she made from scratch every single week without fail. My mother, Linda, waved from the kitchen where she was helping Rose with last-minute preparations. Sarah, honey, you look thin. Are you eating enough? This was Mom's standard greeting, delivered with the particular tone of concern that mothers reserve for children they suspect aren't taking proper care of themselves. She wasn't wrong about my eating habits, but I couldn't exactly explain that I'd been living on pasta and canned soup for the past month without triggering a family intervention. I'm fine, Mom, just busy with work, I replied, the same response I'd been giving for months. It was easier than getting into the details of my financial situation, which would inevitably lead to suggestions that I move back home or find a roommate or make other changes that would solve my problems while creating new ones. Aunt Patricia emerged from the hallway bathroom, and I braced myself for her particular brand of invasive concern. Patricia was Mom's younger sister, a woman who had married well and never let anyone forget it. Her husband, Richard, owned a successful plumbing business, and they lived in a sprawling suburban home with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. Patricia had never worked outside the home, instead dedicating herself to raising their daughter, Melissa, and involving herself in various community organizations that seemed designed primarily to showcase her social status. "Sarah, sweetheart." Patricia's voice carried that artificially sweet tone she used when she was about to say something that would sound caring but feel like criticism. "You look tired. This city life must be wearing you down. Are you getting enough sleep in that tiny apartment?" I forced a smile and accepted her brief hug, catching a whiff of her expensive perfume that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "I'm doing well, Aunt Patricia. The apartment works perfectly for me." "If you say so, dear," she replied with the kind of smile that suggested she knew better than I did about my own living situation. Though I can't imagine why anyone would choose to pay so much for so little space when you could live at home and save money like a sensible person. This was vintage Patricia. The ability to deliver judgment wrapped in concern, making it impossible to respond defensively without looking ungrateful. She had perfected this technique over decades of family gatherings, always managing to make her lifestyle choices seem not just different, but superior to everyone else's decisions. My cousin Melissa appeared at Patricia's elbow, looking like a younger version of her mother with the same perfectly styled blonde hair and carefully curated outfit that screamed expensive casual wear. Melissa was 25, 3 years younger than me, and had recently graduated from law school thanks to her parents' financial support that had covered tuition, living expenses, and even spring break trips to Europe that she documented extensively on social media. "Hi, Sarah!" Melissa's greeting was genuinely warm, without her mother's underlying edge. Despite Patricia's influence, Melissa had managed to remain relatively down to earth, though she had the unmistakable confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. "I've been meaning to call you. I passed the bar exam last month and just started at Harrison, Mitchell & Associates downtown. Maybe we could grab lunch sometime since we're both working in the city now." "That's amazing. Congratulations," I replied, and I meant it. Melissa had worked hard in law school, even if she'd never had to work a paying job to support herself while studying. "I'd love to catch up over lunch." "Melissa's starting salary is absolutely impressive," Patricia interjected, unable to resist, highlighting her daughter's success. $68,000 to start, plus benefits, and they've already hinted at partnership track for high performers. Of course, we always knew she was destined for great things. The casual mention of Melissa's starting salary hit me like a physical blow. $68,000 was more than I made at my day job and freelance work combined, and she was just starting out while I'd been struggling for years to make ends meet. I managed to maintain my congratulatory expression while internally calculating how different my life would be with that kind of income security. "That's wonderful," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. "You must be so excited to start your career." Uncle Dave called everyone to the dining room before the conversation could continue, and I gratefully followed the migration toward Rose's table, already set with her good china and the cloth napkins she insisted on using for family dinners. The dining room could barely accommodate all of us, but Rose refused to consider eating in the larger living room, maintaining that proper meals required proper seating around a proper table. I found myself seated between my brother Marcus and cousin Emma, with Patricia directly across from me where she could maintain eye contact for maximum conversational impact. Marcus was scrolling through his phone while waiting for Rose to finish bringing dishes from the kitchen, completely absorbed in whatever game he was playing. At 26, he still lived with our parents and worked sporadically at various warehouse jobs, spending most of his income on electronics and entertainment. Emma, Uncle Dave's daughter, was working on her master's degree in social work while simultaneously holding down 2 part-time jobs and raising her 4-year-old son as a single mother. Despite her challenging circumstances, Emma somehow managed to maintain an optimistic outlook that I both admired and envied. She had the particular resilience that comes from having no choice but to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult things became. "How's the thesis coming along?" I asked Emma as Rose finally settled into her chair at the head of the table. "Slowly but surely," Emma replied with a tired smile. "Between work and Mason's preschool schedule, I'm writing mostly between 10 p.m. and midnight, but I should finish by spring. The good news is that the Social Services Department has already indicated they'll have a position available when I graduate." That's fantastic," I said, genuinely happy for her. Emma's determination to build a better life for herself and her son was inspiring, especially considering she was doing it without the family financial support that seemed to flow freely toward other relatives. Rose stood to offer her weekly blessing, a tradition that had remained constant throughout my childhood. "We're grateful for this food, for this family, and for the opportunity to gather together each week. May we continue to support and care for one another in all the ways that matter." The familiar words carried extra weight as I considered how differently each family member interpreted the concept of supporting one another. As dishes were passed around the table and conversation resumed, I found myself observing my relatives with new awareness. Patricia dominated much of the discussion, sharing updates about Melissa's job and their recent vacation to Napa Valley, while subtly steering conversations away from topics that might highlight other people's struggles. Marcus contributed occasional grunts between bites of food and phone checks, while Emma divided her attention between eating and preventing her son from spilling juice on Rose's tablecloth. The conversation inevitably turned to family news and updates, the weekly ritual of sharing who was doing what and who needed support. Uncle Dave mentioned that his back had been bothering him again, leading to a discussion of physical therapy, options, and whether his insurance would cover additional treatments. My Aunt Carol shared news about her neighbor's job loss and the community effort to help with groceries until unemployment benefits kicked in. It was during this natural flow of family updates that Patricia leaned forward slightly, fixing me with the particular look she used when she was about to offer unsolicited advice disguised as concern. "Sarah, sweetheart, you've been awfully quiet today. Is everything all right with work? With that little apartment of yours?" The question seemed innocent enough, but I recognized the trap. Patricia had a talent for asking questions that appeared caring while actually fishing for information she could use later. If I said everything was fine, she'd push for details about why I looked tired or stressed. If I admitted to any struggles, she'd launch into a lecture about better life choices wrapped in motherly concern. "Work's been busy," I said carefully, "but I enjoy the challenges. The apartment situation is working out well for my current needs." Patricia murmured, the sound conveying volumes about her skepticism regarding my assessment of my own life. "It's just that you seem a bit overwhelmed lately. I hope you're not stretching yourself too thin trying to maintain a lifestyle that might be beyond your means." The comment stung because it contained just enough truth to be particularly painful. I was stretching myself thin, though not in the way Patricia implied. Rather than living beyond my means through excessive spending, I was actually living below a reasonable standard because so much of my income went toward helping family members who seemed to assume I had unlimited resources. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't sound defensive, Rose intervened with her particular brand of diplomatic redirection. "Patricia, dear, would you mind helping me bring out the dessert? I made that chocolate cake you always enjoy." As Patricia reluctantly followed Rose toward the kitchen, Emma leaned closer to me and spoke quietly. "Don't let her get to you. She's been in a mood all afternoon because Richard's business had a slow month, and she's stressed about their country club dues." This information surprised me. Patricia and Richard always seemed financially invulnerable. The stable success story that the rest of us were supposed to aspire toward. The idea that they might have their own financial pressures had never occurred to me, though it explained Patricia's increased focus on other people's financial decisions lately. The remainder of dinner proceeded without further direct commentary from Patricia, though I caught her watching me with the calculating expression she wore when she was formulating opinions she planned to share later. Dessert was followed by the usual post-meal chaos of cleaning up, packing leftovers, and the gradual exodus of family members returning to their own homes and Sunday evening routines. I was loading leftover cake into a container when Patricia appeared beside me in the kitchen, positioning herself between me and the rest of the family gathered in the living room. Her voice dropped to that confidential whisper she used for delivering advice she considered particularly important. "Sarah, sweetie," she began, her tone dripping with the kind of concern that always preceded criticism. "I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I'm worried about you. You're clearly struggling financially, and I think it's time you considered making some more practical choices about your living situation." The directness of her statement caught me off guard. Patricia usually preferred to circle around her points with subtle implications rather than making direct observations. Her willingness to be blunt suggested she'd been planning this conversation for some time. "I'm managing fine," I replied, keeping my voice low to match hers while internally bristling at her presumption. "Oh, sweetheart," she continued, shaking, her head with exaggerated sympathy. "We can all see that you're barely keeping your head above water. That tiny apartment, the old car, the way you've been looking so tired lately. There's no shame in admitting when things aren't working out, the way you planned." Her words stung because they contained elements of truth I'd been trying to hide from my family. I was tired, my car was old, and my apartment was small by suburban standards. What Patricia couldn't see, or chose not to acknowledge, was that my financial struggles weren't caused by poor planning or expensive lifestyle choices, but by the constant stream of family financial emergencies I'd been covering. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm satisfied with my current situation." Patricia's expression shifted to one of gentle condescension, the look she reserved for family members she considered to be making poor decisions. "Sarah, darling, denial isn't going to solve your problems. Maybe it's time to consider moving back home with your parents, at least temporarily, until you can get on better financial footing. There's no shame in needing help." The suggestion that I needed to move back home because I couldn't manage adult life was particularly galling, given how much of my income had been supporting other family members. I felt anger rising in my chest, but before I could respond, Patricia continued with what she clearly considered her most helpful suggestion. "Or perhaps you should look into a more practical career path. Marketing is such an unstable field, and those creative jobs rarely provide the kind of security a young woman needs. Melissa's doing so well in law, and there are always opportunities in healthcare administration or business management for people willing to work hard." The implication that my career struggles were due to poor choices rather than external circumstances was infuriating, but I forced myself to remain calm. Getting into an argument with Patricia at Grandma Rose's dinner table would accomplish nothing, and would likely become family legend for years to come. "I'll certainly consider your suggestions," I said, the words tasting bitter but necessary to end the conversation without creating a scene. Patricia's face brightened as if she'd successfully solved my life problems through the power of unsolicited advice. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, dear. Sometimes we all need a little guidance from people who've been through similar challenges." The comparison between Patricia's life experience and mine was particularly absurd, given that she'd married Richard straight out of college and had never faced the kind of financial independence I was struggling to maintain. Her idea of financial challenges probably involved choosing between vacation destinations or delaying the purchase of new furniture. As the kitchen cleanup concluded and family members began gathering their belongings to leave, I found myself emotionally exhausted by the combination of financial anxiety and Patricia's well-meaning but devastating critique of my life choices. The drive home would give me time to process the conversation and figure out how to respond to her suggestions without damaging family relationships. But as I was saying goodbye to Rose and collecting my container of leftover cake, Patricia approached me one more time with what appeared to be a sudden afterthought. Her expression had shifted slightly, taking on the particular look she wore when she was about to share information she considered particularly significant. "Oh, Sarah," she said, touching my arm in a gesture that was probably meant to seem casual. "Speaking of financial planning and practical choices, I have some news that might interest you. Richard and I have been working with a financial advisor, lately trying to optimize our investments and plan for Melissa's future." I nodded politely, unsure where this conversation was heading, but sensing that Patricia had something specific she wanted to communicate. Her mention of financial planning seemed oddly timed given her earlier lecture about my supposed financial irresponsibility. The advisor made some interesting observations about family financial dynamics, Patricia continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when she was building toward a point she considered particularly important. "Apparently, it's quite common for families to develop unhealthy patterns where some members consistently contribute more than others, creating imbalances that can be harmful to everyone involved." The observation felt pointed, as if Patricia was hinting at something specific about our family's financial dynamics, but I couldn't determine whether she was criticizing my contributions to family expenses or suggesting that others were taking advantage of my generosity. Her expression remained carefully neutral, making it impossible to interpret her intended meaning. "That's interesting," I replied cautiously, waiting to see where she was taking this observation. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of something calculating in her expression before it was replaced by her usual mask of concerned sweetness. "Yes. Well, I just thought it might be helpful for you to know that sometimes what appears to be family loyalty can actually enable poor financial habits in other people. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow people to experience the natural consequences of their own choices." The comment felt like advice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia was communicating something more specific than general financial wisdom. There was an undercurrent to her words that suggested she knew more about my family financial contributions than I'd realized, though I couldn't imagine how she would have acquired such information. Before I could ask for clarification, Patricia had already moved on to saying goodbye to other family members, leaving me standing in Rose's entryway with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that today's dinner conversation had been more significant than it initially appeared. The drive home through Portland's Sunday evening traffic gave me plenty of time to replay Patricia's various comments and try to understand what she'd really been trying to communicate. Her criticism of my lifestyle choices seemed standard for her, but the timing and specificity suggested she'd been planning the conversation for some time. More puzzling was her final comment about family financial dynamics and enabling poor financial habits. As I navigated the familiar route back to my apartment, I found myself wondering whether Patricia had somehow learned about the money I'd been contributing to various family emergencies. The financial advisor's observations about unhealthy family patterns seemed too coincidental to be random dinner conversation, especially coming immediately after her lecture about my own financial situation. Back in my studio apartment, I settled onto my pull-out couch with the container of Rose's chocolate cake and tried to make sense of the afternoon's interactions. Patricia's words had left me feeling simultaneously angry and confused, defensive, about choices I'd made, but uncertain whether those choices had been as wise as I'd believed. The suggestion that I was enabling poor financial habits in other family members was particularly troubling because it implied a level of family financial dysfunction I hadn't fully recognized. I'd always viewed my contributions as temporary help during difficult periods, but Patricia's comments suggested a pattern of dependency that might be more problematic than I'd realized. As I sat in my small apartment, eating cake and reviewing the past 3 years of family financial requests, I began to see patterns I'd previously missed. The requests had indeed become more frequent and larger over time, and they'd increasingly been framed as emergencies that required immediate assistance rather than problems that could be solved through planning or alternative resources. More concerning was the realization that my family members seemed to assume I would always be available to help financially, despite having no clear picture of my actual financial capacity. They saw my steady job and independent living situation as evidence of disposable income, without considering that I might have my own financial goals and limitations. The conversation with Patricia had been uncomfortable and frustrating, but it had also prompted questions about family dynamics I'd been avoiding. As I prepared for another week of balancing work responsibilities with family obligations, I found myself wondering whether Patricia's criticism contained insights I needed to consider, even if her delivery had been characteristically tactless. What I didn't know yet was that Patricia's seemingly random comments about family financial dynamics had been far from casual observations. In the weeks that followed, I would discover that Sunday's dinner conversation had been carefully orchestrated to plant seeds of doubt about my family relationships, preparing the ground for revelations that would fundamentally change my understanding of the people I'd been sacrificing to support. But that Sunday evening, sitting alone in my apartment with Rose's chocolate cake, I was still operating under the assumption that my family's financial requests represented genuine need rather than calculated manipulation. I still believed that Patricia's criticism, however painful, came from a place of genuine concern rather than strategic misdirection. The truth would prove to be far more complicated and far more painful than anything I could have imagined during those quiet Sunday evening hours of self-reflection. But sometimes the most important journeys begin with the most uncomfortable questions, and Patricia's intrusive dinner conversation had certainly provided plenty of those. The week following that uncomfortable Sunday dinner conversation with Aunt Patricia began normally enough, but by Wednesday morning, everything I thought I knew about my family would be turned completely upside down. I was sitting at my desk at Meridian Marketing Solutions, reviewing social media analytics for a local bakery's spring campaign, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Jennifer Walsh from Cascade Medical Center. I got your number from Melissa Morrison. Could we meet for coffee today? It's important and concerns your family. I have information you need to hear." The message sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the office's aggressive air. Conditioning. Jennifer Walsh wasn't a name I recognized, and the formal tone combined with the medical center connection immediately triggered my anxiety. My first thought was that someone in my family had been in an accident or received a serious diagnosis, but the phrasing suggested something more complex than a medical emergency. I stepped away from my desk and called the number, my hands slightly trembling as I dialed. Jennifer answered on the second ring with a professional but warm greeting that identified her as a patient financial coordinator at Cascade Medical Center. Her voice carried the particular tone healthcare workers use when they're about to deliver difficult information with careful sensitivity. "Thank you for calling back so quickly," Jennifer said. "I realize this is unusual, reaching out like this, but I've been struggling with some information that I believe you have a right to know. It concerns financial arrangements that have been made in your name, and I think we should discuss this in person rather than over the phone." The phrase, "financial arrangements in your name," sent my heart racing. After Aunt Patricia's comments about family financial dynamics, I'd been questioning whether I fully understood my own family's money situations, but the idea that someone had made financial arrangements using my name suggested something far more serious than I'd imagined. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown during my lunch break, a neutral location where we could have a private conversation without the institutional atmosphere of the medical center. Jennifer described herself as a woman in her 40s, with short gray hair who would be carrying a manila folder, details that made our meeting sound more like a covert intelligence exchange than a casual coffee date. The hours between Jennifer's call and our scheduled meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept racing through possibilities, each scenario more troubling than the last. Had someone in my family been hiding a serious medical condition that required expensive treatment? Had one of my relatives used my credit or identity to secure medical care they couldn't afford? The questions multiplied without providing any answers, creating a background hum of anxiety that made concentration impossible. At 11:30, I told my supervisor I needed an extended lunch break for a personal matter and drove to the coffee shop Jennifer had suggested. The place was busy with the usual lunch crowd of downtown office workers and college students, providing enough ambient noise to ensure our conversation wouldn't be overheard by neighboring tables. I spotted Jennifer immediately, sitting at a corner table with the promised manila folder positioned beside her coffee cup, like evidence waiting to be presented. She looked exactly as she'd described herself, with the particular bearing of someone who spent their professional life navigating sensitive conversations with families facing medical crises. "Sarah?" she asked as I approached, and when I nodded, she gestured for me to sit across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice. I know this must seem strange, but I've been debating whether to contact you for several weeks, and I finally decided you deserve to know what's been happening." Jennifer opened the manila folder to reveal a stack of medical billing documents, insurance forms, and what appeared to be financial assistance applications. The paperwork looked official but dense, the kind of documentation that accompanies serious medical procedures rather than routine healthcare visits. "I need to be careful about patient privacy regulations," Jennifer began. "But what I can tell you is that someone in your family has been receiving expensive medical treatment at our facility for the past 18 months. The treatment has been partially covered by insurance, but there have been significant out-of-pocket costs that someone has been paying on the patient's behalf." My stomach clenched as I prepared for her to tell me that I'd somehow been responsible for medical bills I didn't know about, another layer of financial obligation that had been hidden from my awareness. But Jennifer's next words revealed something even more disturbing. "The person who has been making payments on this account listed you as their primary financial supporter," Jennifer continued, sliding a document across the table. "According to the financial assistance applications we have on file, you've been providing substantial monthly support to help cover these medical expenses." I stared at the document, recognizing my name and personal information, but having no memory of completing any medical financial assistance applications. The form indicated that I'd been contributing $500 monthly toward medical expenses for a family member, money that was supposedly being deducted automatically from my bank account. "I've never seen this form before," I said, my voice sounding strangely distant even to my own ears. "I'm not making any automatic payments for medical expenses. There's definitely some kind of mistake here." Jennifer's expression grew more concerned as she processed my response. "That's exactly what I was afraid of," she said quietly. "The person who submitted these applications has been making payments, but they've been claiming that you're the source of the funds. If you're not aware of this arrangement, then someone has been misrepresenting your involvement in this situation." She pulled out another document, this one showing a payment history that stretched back 18 months. The payments were indeed monthly, always exactly $500, and always made in cash rather than through electronic transfer or check. Someone had been physically bringing cash to the medical center every month and claiming that I was the source of these payments. "Who is the patient?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Jennifer hesitated, clearly weighing patient privacy concerns against the apparent fraud that was being perpetrated using my name. "The patient is Melissa Morrison. The person making payments and filing these applications is Patricia Morrison, who identified herself as the patient's mother and your aunt." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Melissa, Patricia's daughter, had been receiving expensive medical treatment for a year and a half, and Patricia had been telling the medical center that I was financially supporting this treatment. Not only had I been completely unaware of Melissa's medical situation, but Patricia had been using my name and reputation to secure financial assistance while I struggled to pay my own basic expenses. "What kind of medical treatment?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer consulted her folder again before responding. Fertility treatments. Melissa has been undergoing IVF procedures, which can cost thousands of dollars per cycle even with insurance coverage. She's completed 4 cycles over the past 18 months, with varying degrees of success. The information was overwhelming on multiple levels. Melissa had been trying to get pregnant through expensive fertility treatments, a major life event that no one in my family had mentioned to me. More disturbing was the realization that Patricia had been financing these treatments while telling the medical center that I was the financial supporter, creating a false narrative about my involvement in my cousin's reproductive health care. "I need to understand this correctly," I said, trying to organize the information Jennifer was sharing. Melissa has been receiving fertility treatments that cost thousands of dollars. Patricia has been paying for these treatments in cash, but she's been telling you that I'm the one providing the money, and she's used my name on financial assistance applications without my knowledge or consent. "That's correct," Jennifer confirmed. "And I'm telling you about this because something didn't seem right about the arrangement. In my experience, when family members are genuinely supporting someone's medical expenses, they're usually more involved in the process. They ask questions about treatment progress. They want to understand billing procedures. They request documentation for their own financial records. But you've never contacted our office, never requested information about the account, never seemed to be involved despite supposedly being the primary financial supporter." The pattern Jennifer described made perfect sense from my perspective, since I'd had no idea any of this was happening, but it also revealed how thoroughly Patricia had been manipulating the situation. She'd created an elaborate fiction about my involvement while ensuring I remained completely ignorant of the circumstances I was supposedly supporting. "There's something else," Jennifer continued, pulling out what appeared to be a copy of a cashier's check. "Last month, Patricia made a large lump sum payment toward outstanding balances. The check was for $8,000, and when I asked about the source of such a large payment, she told me you had received an inheritance and wanted to help Melissa with her fertility journey." I stared at the check copy, noting that it had been issued by a bank where I didn't have any accounts, and for an amount of money I'd never possessed at one time. The idea that I'd received an inheritance was completely fabricated, another layer of lies Patricia had constructed to explain financial resources she couldn't otherwise account for. "Jennifer," I said, my voice gaining strength as the implications became clearer, "I need you to understand that none of this information is accurate. I haven't been supporting Melissa's medical expenses. I haven't received any inheritance, and I've never authorized Patricia to make financial arrangements in my name. This appears to be some form of fraud." Jennifer nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I suspected, which is why I felt obligated to contact you. Using someone's name on financial assistance applications without their knowledge is serious misconduct. And if Patricia has been misrepresenting the source of these payments, she may have violated several regulations regarding medical financial assistance programs." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes as Jennifer showed me additional documentation revealing the full scope of Patricia's deception. Beyond the false financial assistance applications, Patricia had apparently created an entire narrative about my family financial situation, describing me as someone with significant disposable income who was committed to supporting my cousin's family planning efforts. Most disturbing was a handwritten letter Patricia had submitted to the medical center's financial assistance program, supposedly written by me, expressing my dedication to helping Melissa achieve her dream of motherhood. The letter described my motivation for supporting her treatment and my willingness to continue payments for as long as necessary. The writing style was convincingly similar to my own, suggesting Patricia had carefully studied my handwriting before creating this forgery. "What should I do with this information?" I asked Jennifer as our meeting concluded. "Obviously, I need to contact Patricia and demand an explanation, but I'm also concerned about the potential legal implications of using my name on official documents without permission." Jennifer handed me copies of all the relevant documents, along with her business card, and contact information for the medical center's legal department. I'd recommend documenting everything carefully, and possibly consulting with an attorney who specializes in identity fraud. What Patricia has done could constitute several different crimes, depending on how the situation developed and what her intentions were. As I drove back to work, my mind reeled with the implications of Jennifer's revelations. Patricia hadn't just been making insensitive comments about my financial situation at Sunday dinner. She'd been actively using my name and reputation to facilitate her daughter's expensive medical treatments, while I remained completely unaware of the deception. The afternoon at work passed in a blur as I tried to process what I'd learned and figure out how to respond. My first instinct was to call Patricia immediately and demand an explanation, but I realized that a confrontation without careful preparation might allow her to destroy evidence or create additional complications. Instead, I spent my evening researching identity fraud and financial misrepresentation, trying to understand the legal framework surrounding Patricia's actions. What I discovered was deeply troubling. Using someone's name on financial assistance, applications without their consent was indeed fraud, potentially carrying serious legal consequences. The forged letter purporting to be from me could constitute document fraud, and the overall pattern of deception might fall under broader identity theft statutes. But beyond the legal implications, I was struggling with the personal betrayal, represented by Patricia's actions. She'd not only deceived me and the medical center, but she'd also created a false narrative about my character and financial priorities that painted me as someone deeply invested in family medical expenses while I'd been struggling to pay my own basic bills. The next morning brought a text message that initially seemed unrelated to Jennifer's revelations, but would soon prove to be another piece of an increasingly complex puzzle. My cousin Emma, Uncle Dave's daughter who was working on her master's degree while raising her son alone, had sent a simple message asking if we could talk privately about a family matter. Emma and I met for coffee after her morning classes, and she immediately launched into an apology that caught me completely off guard. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that's been bothering me for months. I know you've been helping different family members with money, and I feel terrible that I haven't been able to contribute anything to help with the family expenses." Her assumption that I was some kind of family financial coordinator was bewildering, especially in light of what I'd learned about Patricia's deceptions. "Emma, what family expenses are you talking about? I'm not coordinating any kind of family financial support." Emma looked confused by my response. "But Patricia told everyone that you've been the main person helping with various family emergencies. She said you've been contributing to Grandma Rose's medical expenses, helping with Ashley's college costs, and even supporting Melissa's medical treatments. She made it sound like you'd taken on the role of family financial supporter because you were in the best position to help." The scope of Patricia's lies was becoming clearer. She hadn't just deceived the medical center about my involvement in Melissa's fertility treatments. She'd been telling the entire extended family that I was some kind of family financial benefactor, creating expectations and assumptions that had no basis in reality. "Emma, I need you to understand that Patricia has been misrepresenting my financial situation and my involvement in family matters," I said carefully. "While I have occasionally helped individual family members with small amounts when I could afford it, I'm not some kind of family financial coordinator, and I certainly haven't been supporting major expenses like medical treatments or college costs." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to concern as she processed this information. "But Patricia has been talking about your contributions for months. She even mentioned how generous you were being with Melissa's fertility treatments, and how grateful the family should be for your support." The revelation that Patricia had been discussing my supposed support for Melissa's fertility treatments with other family members was particularly disturbing. Not only had she been deceiving the medical center, but she'd been creating a family narrative that positioned me as actively involved in and supportive of expensive medical procedures I'd known nothing about. "Emma, I found out yesterday that Patricia has been using my name on medical financial assistance applications without my knowledge, I said, deciding that Emma deserved to know the truth about what was happening. She's been telling Cascade Medical Center that I'm financially supporting Melissa's fertility treatments, but I've never authorized any such arrangement or made any payments toward medical expenses. Emma's eyes widened as she understood the implications. Oh my God, Sarah. That's fraud. She's been lying to everyone, including the medical center, about your involvement. But why would she do something like that? The question of Patricia's motivations was one I'd been struggling with since Jennifer's revelations. The most obvious explanation was that Patricia needed to demonstrate financial support for Melissa's treatments in order to qualify for assistance programs, and using my name provided credibility for her claims about family financial resources. But there might be deeper motivations related to Patricia's image management within our extended family. By positioning me as the primary family financial supporter, she could deflect attention from her own family's financial situation while creating a narrative that made her daughter's expensive medical treatments seem more justified and sustainable. I think Patricia has been trying to manage how the family perceives both my financial situation and her own, I told Emma. By claiming that I'm supporting various family expenses, she creates the impression that there's adequate financial resources within the family to handle emergencies and major expenses. Emma shook her head in disbelief. This explains so much about recent family conversations. I've been feeling guilty for months because I thought you were carrying the financial burden for everyone else while I couldn't contribute anything. I've been working extra shifts and trying to save money to help with what I thought were shared family obligations. The realization that Patricia's lies had been creating guilt and financial pressure for other family members added another dimension to her deception. Emma had been working herself even harder because she believed I was single-handedly supporting family financial needs, when in reality, I'd been struggling to manage my own basic expenses. Our conversation continued for over an hour as Emma shared other family financial discussions she'd heard over the past year. According to Emma, Patricia had been regularly updating family members on my supposed contributions to various causes, creating a detailed narrative about my financial generosity that bore no resemblance to my actual circumstances. Most concerning was Emma's report that Patricia had been discussing my financial situation with people outside our immediate family, including neighbors and friends from her social circles. She'd apparently been portraying me as a successful, young professional who was dedicated to supporting family members, using my supposed generosity as an example of proper family values. After Emma and I parted ways, I spent the remainder of the day trying to understand the full scope of Patricia's deceptions and their potential consequences. The pattern that was emerging suggested a level of manipulation and misrepresentation that went far beyond simple family financial coordination. That evening, I called Jennifer Walsh to report the additional information Emma had shared and to ask about next steps for addressing the fraudulent financial assistance applications. Jennifer's response was both supportive and sobering. Based on what you're telling me, Patricia has created an extensive web of lies that may have legal consequences beyond just the medical financial assistance fraud, Jennifer said. If she's been misrepresenting your financial involvement to multiple people and organizations, she may have violated additional regulations and possibly engaged in broader identity fraud. Jennifer recommended that I contact the medical center's legal department immediately to report the fraudulent applications and request that my name be removed from all documentation related to Melissa's treatment. She also suggested consulting with a personal attorney who could advise me on protecting myself from any additional financial or legal exposure resulting from Patricia's deceptions. The legal consultation I arranged for the following day provided clarity about the seriousness of Patricia's actions, while also revealing the complex challenges involved in addressing identity fraud perpetrated by family members. Attorney Michael Chen, who specialized in identity theft and financial fraud cases, reviewed Jennifer's documentation with obvious concern. "Your aunt has committed several serious crimes," Michael said after examining the evidence. fraudulent use of identity on financial assistance applications, document forgery, and potentially broader identity theft, depending on whether she's misrepresented your financial information to other organizations. The challenge will be proving intent and determining the full scope of her deceptions. Michael recommended a comprehensive audit of my financial and personal information to determine whether Patricia had used my identity in other contexts. This would involve checking my credit reports, reviewing any financial assistance applications that might have been filed in my name, and investigating whether Patricia had accessed my personal information through means I wasn't aware of. The prospect of discovering additional layers of deception was daunting, but Michael emphasized that protecting myself from ongoing fraud required understanding the complete picture of Patricia's activities. He also warned that confronting Patricia directly before completing this investigation might prompt her to destroy evidence or create additional complications. Over the following weekend, I began the systematic review of my financial and personal information that Michael had recommended. The process was tedious and anxiety-provoking, as each document review carried the potential to reveal new dimensions of Patricia's deceptions. The credit report review revealed several inquiries I didn't recognize, including checks by financial institutions where I'd never applied for accounts or services. While these inquiries hadn't resulted in new accounts being opened in my name, they suggested that Patricia or someone acting on her behalf had been using my personal information to explore financial options. More disturbing was the discovery of a financial assistance application filed with our local community services agency, purportedly on behalf of Grandma Rose, but listing me as the primary family financial supporter. According to the application, I'd been providing significant monthly support for Rose's living expenses and medical costs, enabling her to qualify for additional assistance programs. This application contained detailed information about my income, living situation, and family financial contributions that could only have been obtained through careful observation of my personal circumstances. Patricia had clearly been monitoring my financial situation far more closely than I'd realized, gathering information she could use to create convincing narratives about my resources and commitments. The community services application also revealed that Patricia had been coordinating multiple family financial assistance programs, positioning different family members as beneficiaries, while consistently representing me as the primary source of family financial support. This created a complex web of interdependent applications that painted a picture of our family's financial situation that was almost entirely fictional. By Sunday evening, I had compiled a comprehensive file of Patricia's deceptions, including the medical center fraud, the community services applications, and several other instances where my name and financial information had been misrepresented. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic identity fraud that had been ongoing for at least 18 months. The question now was how to confront Patricia with this evidence while protecting myself from additional harm and ensuring that the fraudulent representations were corrected with all relevant organizations. Michael had advised against confronting Patricia alone, suggesting instead that we arrange a formal meeting with legal representation present. But as I prepared for another Sunday dinner at Grandma Rose's house, I realized that Patricia's deceptions had created a situation where normal family interactions had become impossible. Every conversation now carried the potential for additional manipulation, and every family financial discussion was suspect, given what I now knew about Patricia's willingness to misrepresent my involvement. The drive to Rose's house that Sunday felt different from all the previous weekly journeys. Instead of my usual anxiety about family financial requests, I was carrying the weight of knowledge about systematic fraud and manipulation that had been hidden beneath the surface of our family dynamics for months. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, I could see through the living room window that the usual Sunday gathering was already in progress. But this time, I wasn't walking into a family dinner as much as I was entering what felt like a confrontation that would fundamentally alter our family relationships. Patricia was in the kitchen helping Rose with final dinner preparations, maintaining the same facade of family-oriented helpfulness that had masked her deceptions for so long. watching her interact normally with other family members while knowing the extent of her lies created a surreal sense of cognitive dissonance. The meal proceeded with typical family conversation until Patricia made a comment that seemed designed to test whether I'd discovered her deceptions. "Sarah, honey, I was talking to Jennifer at the medical center the other day, and she mentioned how wonderful it's been working with you on Melissa's treatment arrangements. It's so nice that you've been able to coordinate the financial aspects so smoothly." The casual mention of Jennifer Walsh in Patricia's comment confirmed that she knew Jennifer and I had been in contact, but her tone suggested she was uncertain about exactly what information had been shared. This gave me an opportunity to gauge Patricia's awareness of my discovery without revealing the full extent of my knowledge. "Actually, Patricia, I had a very interesting conversation with Jennifer this week," I replied, watching her face carefully for reactions. She shared some information about financial arrangements that I wasn't previously aware of. Patricia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested increased alertness. "Oh? I hope there weren't any problems with the paperwork. These medical financial assistance programs can be so complicated." Her response confirmed that she understood Jennifer and I had discussed the fraudulent applications, but she was still trying to maintain the fiction that I'd been legitimately involved in the financial arrangements. This gave me the opening I needed to begin addressing her deceptions directly. "Patricia, I think we need to have a private conversation about these financial arrangements," I said, my voice remaining calm despite the adrenaline rushing through my system. There seemed to be some significant misunderstandings about my involvement that need to be clarified. The rest of the family continued their dinner conversations, unaware that a confrontation was developing between Patricia and me. But I could see Patricia calculating her response, trying to determine how much I knew and what strategy would best protect her from the consequences of her deceptions. "Of course, dear," Patricia replied with forced casualness. "I'm sure we can clear up any confusion. These financial coordination efforts can sometimes create communication gaps." Her willingness to discuss the situation privately suggested that she recognized the conversation was inevitable. But her continued references to financial coordination and communication gaps indicated she was still trying to minimize the seriousness of what she'd done. As the family dinner concluded and other relatives began their usual post-meal cleanup routines, Patricia and I stepped onto Rose's back porch for what would prove to be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. The familiar setting of family gatherings provided an ironic backdrop for a discussion that would fundamentally alter our family relationships. "Sarah," Patricia began before I could speak, "I can see that you're upset about something, and I want you to know that everything I've done has been with the best intentions for our family." Her preemptive attempt to frame the conversation in terms of good intentions was exactly what I'd expected. But hearing her characterize systematic fraud as family-oriented helpfulness confirmed the extent of her self-deception or calculated manipulation. "Patricia," I replied, pulling out copies of the documents Jennifer had provided. "I know about the fraudulent financial assistance applications you filed using my name. I know about the forged letter you wrote claiming to be from me. And I know that you've been telling people throughout our family and community that I'm financially supporting expenses I've never authorized or even known about." The confrontation had begun, and there would be no going back to the previous family dynamics where Patricia's deceptions remained hidden beneath the surface of our Sunday dinner conversations. Patricia's face went completely white as she stared at the documents in my hands. For a moment, the mask of concerned family matriarch slipped entirely, revealing something calculating and desperate underneath. She glanced toward the house where the rest of our family was still engaged in their usual post-dinner activities, then back at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Sarah, you don't understand the full situation," she said, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Melissa has been through so much heartbreak with the fertility treatments. When the medical center required proof of family financial support for the assistance programs, I just wanted to help her qualify. I never intended for it to go this far. Her attempt to frame systematic fraud as motherly concern was exactly the response I'd anticipated, but hearing her minimize months of identity theft as a minor misunderstanding confirmed that she either didn't grasp the seriousness of her actions or was committed to maintaining her deceptions regardless of consequences. "Ooh, Patricia, you forged my signature on multiple documents," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "You've been telling healthcare providers, community service agencies, and family members that I'm financially supporting expenses I knew nothing about. This isn't a misunderstanding or a communication error. This is fraud." She stepped closer, her expression shifting from defensive to pleading. "But think about what this will do to Melissa if it comes out. She's finally pregnant after all these treatments. The stress of a family scandal could affect the pregnancy. And what about our family relationships? Do you really want to destroy everything over paperwork complications?" The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Patricia was attempting to use Melissa's pregnancy, which I'd learned about only through medical fraud documentation, as emotional leverage to avoid consequences for her criminal behavior. She was also trying to reframe my legitimate concerns about identity theft as family betrayal. "Congratulations to Melissa on her pregnancy," I said, meaning it despite the circumstances. "But her medical success doesn't excuse what you've done. And framing this as paperwork complications rather than identity fraud isn't going to make the legal problems disappear." Patricia's demeanor shifted again, this time toward anger. "Legal problems? Sarah, you're talking about involving lawyers and authorities in private family matters. Is that really the kind of person you want to be? Someone who destroys family relationships over money?" Her attempt to characterize identity fraud as a family money dispute was particularly galling given that she'd been systematically misrepresenting my financial situation while I struggled to pay basic expenses. The woman who'd spent months telling everyone I was financially supporting family medical treatments was now trying to minimize the impact of her deceptions. "This isn't about money, Patricia," I replied. "This is about you using my name and identity without permission to deceive healthcare providers and family members. The fact that you can't see the difference between family financial coordination and fraud is exactly why this situation has gotten so serious." Before Patricia could respond, the back door opened and Melissa stepped onto the porch, looking radiant with early pregnancy, but clearly concerned about the intense conversation. She'd interrupted. "Mom, is everything okay? Rose is asking about dessert, and everyone seems to be wondering where you disappeared to." The moment crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamics. Here was Melissa, genuinely happy about her pregnancy, completely unaware that her mother had been committing fraud to finance her fertility treatments. Patricia had created a situation where her daughter's joy was built on deception and criminal activity. "Melissa," I said gently, "congratulations on your pregnancy. That's wonderful news, and I'm genuinely happy for you and your husband." "Thank you," Melissa replied, her smile warm but confused. "Mom's been telling everyone how supportive you've been through the whole fertility journey. I keep meaning to call and thank you properly for everything you've contributed." The innocent gratitude in Melissa's voice was heartbreaking because it revealed how thoroughly Patricia's lies had permeated our family relationships. Melissa genuinely believed I'd been supporting her medical treatments, and her appreciation was real, even though it was based on completely false information. "Melissa, I think there are some things about your medical financial arrangements that you and I need to discuss privately," I said carefully. "Your mother has been handling the financial coordination, but there may be some aspects of the situation that aren't exactly as they've been presented." Patricia's expression became panicked as she realized I was about to reveal her deceptions to Melissa. "Sarah, please don't do this here. Not tonight. Let's schedule a time to discuss everything properly when we can all think clearly." But Melissa had picked up on the tension between her mother and me, and her confusion was shifting toward concern. "What's going on?" Mom, you said Sarah has been helping with the medical expenses. Is there some kind of problem with the payments? The moment had arrived where Patricia's elaborate deceptions would either be exposed or I would become complicit in maintaining them. Looking at Melissa's innocent face, I realized that she deserved to know the truth about how her medical treatments had been financed, even if that truth would be painful and complicated. Melissa, your mother has been telling the medical center that I've been financially supporting your fertility treatments, I said gently. She's filed financial assistance applications using my name and information, claiming that I've been contributing $500 monthly toward your medical expenses. But I've never made any such payments, and I wasn't aware of these arrangements until this week. Melissa's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she processed this information. She looked between her mother and me, clearly trying to understand how such a significant misunderstanding could have occurred. Mom? What is she talking about? Melissa asked, her voice rising slightly. You told me that Sarah was helping with the costs, and that's why we qualified for the assistance programs. If she hasn't been contributing money, then how have we been paying for everything? Patricia's face cycled through multiple expressions as she realized that her deceptions were finally being exposed to the person she'd been trying to protect. Melissa, honey, it's complicated. The medical center required proof of family financial support, and Sarah has been helping the family in other ways, so I just documented it differently to meet their requirements. The euphemistic language Patricia was using to describe fraud was astounding, but Melissa wasn't buying the sanitized version of events. Mom, did you lie to the medical center about Sarah's involvement? Did you use her name on applications without telling her? I was trying to help you qualify for assistance, Patricia said defensively. The requirements were so strict, and I knew Sarah would want to help if she could afford it, so I just structured the applications to show family support. Melissa's expression shifted to horror as she understood the implications of what her mother was saying. Oh my God, Mom! You committed fraud. You used Sarah's identity without her permission to get medical financial assistance. Do you understand what you've done? The conversation that followed was painful for everyone involved. Melissa demanded details about the fraudulent applications, while Patricia continued trying to minimize her actions as helpful family coordination rather than criminal behavior. As the full scope of the deceptions became clear, Melissa's initial shock transformed into anger and embarrassment. Mom, how could you do this? Melissa asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. Not just to Sarah, but to me? Do you realize that my entire fertility journey has been built on lies? That every payment, every assistance program, every bit of financial support has been based on fraud? Patricia's attempts to comfort her daughter were rebuffed as Melissa stepped away from both of us, clearly needing space to process what she'd learned. I need to talk to my husband about this, Melissa said. And I need to figure out how to make this right with the medical center. This is going to affect my ongoing prenatal care, isn't it? The realization that Patricia's fraud might impact Melissa's pregnancy care added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. Medical providers would need to correct their records and potentially reevaluate financial assistance eligibility based on accurate information rather than Patricia's fabricated family support claims. Melissa, I want you to know that this doesn't change how I feel about you or your pregnancy, I said. Your mother's actions don't reflect on you, and we'll figure out how to address the medical center situation without affecting your care. As Melissa went back inside to collect her husband and leave the family gathering, Patricia and I were left alone on the porch to continue our confrontation. The immediate crisis of revealing the truth to Melissa had been resolved, but the broader questions about legal consequences and family relationships remained unaddressed. Are you satisfied now? Patricia asked, her voice bitter. You've destroyed my daughter's peace of mind during her pregnancy. And for what? To prove a point about paperwork? Her continued characterization of identity fraud as a paperwork issue revealed the depth of her denial about the seriousness of her actions. Even after watching her daughter's distress upon learning the truth, Patricia was still trying to blame me for the consequences of her own criminal behavior. "Patricia, I didn't create this situation," I replied firmly. "You chose to use my identity without permission. You chose to lie to healthcare providers and family members. You chose to build your daughter's medical care on fraudulent financial assistance applications. I'm not responsible for the consequences of your choices." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes as Patricia alternated between attempts to justify her actions and efforts to negotiate some kind of private resolution that would avoid legal consequences. She offered to pay back the fraudulent assistance money, to correct the medical center records, to do whatever was necessary to make the situation right without involving attorneys or law enforcement. But the scope of Patricia's deceptions extended far beyond the medical center fraud. My investigation had revealed fraudulent applications with community service agencies, false representations to family members, and a pattern of identity misuse that suggested systematic criminal behavior rather than isolated mistakes. "Patricia, this isn't something that can be resolved with private apologies and financial restitution," I explained. "You've committed multiple crimes over an extended period. You've damaged my reputation and credit standing. You've created legal and financial exposure that I'm still discovering. This requires formal legal resolution." As our conversation concluded and we prepared to return to the family gathering, Patricia made one final attempt to manipulate the situation through emotional appeals. "Sarah, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But please, consider what this will do to our family. Your grandmother is 92 years old. Do you really want her final years to be filled with criminal investigations and family scandals?" The attempt to use Grandma Rose's age and health as leverage was particularly manipulative, but it also revealed Patricia's fundamental misunderstanding of responsibility and consequences. She seemed genuinely to believe that her criminal behavior should be overlooked to preserve family harmony, regardless of the impact on her victims. "Grandma Rose deserves to know the truth about what's been happening in her family," I replied. "And she deserves to have family members who are honest and trustworthy, rather than people who commit fraud and then expect others to cover for them." When we returned to the house, the family gathering had taken on a subdued atmosphere. Melissa and her husband had left abruptly, citing sudden illness, and other family members were clearly sensing that something significant had occurred. Patricia attempted to maintain normal conversation, but her forced cheerfulness only highlighted the tension that had developed. I stayed long enough to help with cleanup and say goodbye to Grandma Rose, but the weekly family dinner tradition that had been such a consistent part of my life felt fundamentally changed. The revelation of Patricia's deceptions had exposed fault lines in our family relationships that couldn't be easily repaired. The weeks that followed brought a cascade of consequences as the full scope of Patricia's fraud was addressed through legal and administrative channels. The medical center corrected their records and pursued collection of the fraudulently obtained assistance funds. Community service agencies investigated the false applications filed in my name. Credit reporting agencies removed unauthorized inquiries from my files. Melissa and I met several times to discuss the situation and work through the emotional impact of discovering that her fertility treatments had been financed through fraud. Her initial anger toward her mother gradually evolved into a more complex understanding of Patricia's motivations while maintaining clear boundaries about acceptable behavior. "I keep trying to understand how she convinced herself that fraud was acceptable," Melissa said during one of our coffee meetings. "I know she wanted to help me, but using your identity without permission isn't help. It's theft." The criminal investigation that followed revealed additional dimensions of Patricia's deceptions that even I hadn't discovered. She'd been using family members' identities for various financial assistance programs over several years, creating a complex web of fraud that extended beyond my situation. Patricia ultimately accepted a plea agreement that included restitution payments, community, service and probation rather than jail time. The legal consequences were significant, but not devastating, allowing her to maintain employment and family relationships while acknowledging the seriousness of her crimes. The impact on our family relationships proved more lasting than the legal consequences. Patricia's fraud had created trust issues that affected how family members interacted with each other and approached financial discussions. The weekly Sunday dinners continued, but with different dynamics and more cautious conversations. For me personally, the experience proved transformative in unexpected ways. Discovering Patricia's deceptions forced me to examine my own family, relationships, and financial boundaries more critically. I realized that my willingness to help family members financially had been based partly on guilt and people-pleasing, rather than genuine generosity and clear boundaries. 6 months after the confrontation on Rose's back porch, my life had stabilized in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant pressure of family financial requests based on Patricia's false narratives about my resources, I was able to focus on my own financial goals and career development. The freelance graphic design work that had been a survival necessity evolved into a planned transition toward independent consulting. My improved financial situation, combined with lessons learned about setting boundaries, allowed me to approach family relationships from a position of choice rather than obligation. Melissa's pregnancy progressed successfully despite the stress of the fraud revelations. She and her husband established their own financial arrangements for ongoing medical care, refusing further assistance from Patricia while maintaining their relationship with appropriate boundaries. The final resolution came almost a year later, when Patricia approached me at another family gathering with what appeared to be a genuine apology. "Sarah, I know I damaged our relationship and created problems that affected your life in ways I didn't fully understand. I want you to know that I've been working with a counselor to understand why I made the choices I did, and I take full responsibility for the harm I caused." Her apology felt more genuine than her previous attempts at damage control, but I remained cautious about rebuilding trust. "I appreciate your apology, Patricia. I hope the counseling helps you understand the impact of your actions and prevents similar problems in the future." The conversation marked a tentative step toward rebuilding our family relationship, but with fundamentally different dynamics based on honesty and respect rather than manipulation and false narratives. Patricia's fraud had taught both of us important lessons about the difference between genuine family support and exploitative behavior disguised as care. Looking back on the experience, I recognized that Patricia's whispered comment at that Sunday dinner months earlier had been more revealing than I'd initially understood. Her question about whether I was still struggling had been loaded with knowledge about fraud she'd been perpetrating using my identity, making her concern seem particularly calculated and manipulative. The journey from that uncomfortable dinner, conversation to legal resolution and family healing had been difficult, but ultimately necessary. Patricia's deceptions had created unsustainable family dynamics that required exposure and correction, regardless of the short-term disruption involved. As I drove home from family gatherings now, I felt a different kind of satisfaction than the anxious relief that had characterized my previous Sunday evening drives. Instead of wondering what financial request might be coming next or how I'd manage to help family members while meeting my own needs, I could focus on genuine relationships built on mutual respect and honest communication. The experience had taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to refuse to enable their harmful behavior, even when that refusal creates conflict and temporary pain. Patricia's fraud had hurt multiple people, but addressing it honestly had ultimately created opportunities for healthier relationships based on truth rather than manipulation. The Sunday dinners continued, but with a new understanding of what family loyalty really meant. Instead of blind obligation to support others regardless of circumstances, I'd learned to distinguish between genuine need and manipulative exploitation, between temporary assistance and enabling destructive patterns. Patricia's whispered question about my struggles had inadvertently revealed the truth about our family dynamics, but not in the way she'd intended. The real struggle hadn't been my financial situation, but rather the toxic pattern of deception and manipulation that had been hidden beneath the surface of our family relationships. Exposing that truth had been painful, but ultimately liberating, creating space for authentic connections based on honesty rather than fraud. The family member who had been still struggling wasn't me, but Patricia herself, caught in a web of lies that had required constant maintenance and escalation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.